Please welcome Jane Castor.
All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate it. Is the microphone on, or you guys are just recording? Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out for Women's Month celebrations, and especially for the guys. I hope you all weren't forced to come out here. It's nice to have this. And actually, I've done a lot of speaking during this month so far, so it's a pleasure to be before you guys. Now, what I'm going to do, if you guys agree to all this, is I'm going to speak to you a little bit about my experience in law enforcement. And for those of you who aren't aware, it happens to be a male-dominated profession. I don't know if anybody noticed that. But I'll talk about that, some of my viewpoints, and then open it up to questions. So if you guys don't ask questions, then I continue to talk. And I can talk forever, trust me. We may even hold everybody in here till dinner time. But I spent 31 years in law enforcement. I have 2 boys that are getting ready to turn 18, and I was the chief for 6 years, with all that encompasses as far as the media goes. So I'm saying that to let you know that there's really no question that I have not been asked, and I'll answer anything that you guys ask, regardless of what it deals with. Try to answer it honestly, because trust me, all the embarrassing questions have already been asked by my kids, and usually made public. Anybody who has kids always knows that, especially when they're little, they just blurt things out in public that, like, I asked one of my kids one day in 4th grade, and this one little girl, it was just hilarious. She was like one of my little favorites of all the kids that they went with, and she had her little brother had just been born. And I said, what does he look like? And she goes, a lima bean. And I go, really? I go, no, what does he look like? She goes, no, he looks like a lima bean. And then she goes, and our house is just a disaster. She's going on and on. So I go to the teacher, my kids don't talk like that, do they? She's like, no. I'm like, good, I'll put an end to that. All righty, so as was said, I was born and raised here in Tampa, out in North Tampa, probably before any of you guys were born. Well, actually, when I became a police officer in 1984 was probably before you guys were born. But I was born out there. I was number 4 out of 5 kids, which I say my parents' philosophy was that, you know, the rest of them are still alive. You guys do whatever you want. By the time my little brother and I came along, my older brother and sisters will say that we had it easy when we were young, but I don't know about that. We probably did. But I grew up, I was really poor out in North Tampa. We used to ride our horses, and not our horses, other people's horses, out in, not that I was stealing horses, we had permission, but out where Avala's at now. So it was really a lot of, country out there. In North Del Mabry, north of Ehrlich, there was nothing. Nothing. There was the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Posse, the park that's now Lake Park. And there was a junkyard out there. And Gaither, my kids go to Gaither now. It used to be Zambito's farm out there. So grew up in a really small neighborhood. Mostly all the kids my age were boys. And that, coupled with the fact that I was like 6 foot in 2nd grade, I became pretty good in sports. But one of the things is I really didn't realize that we were poor until I got to high school. And then, you kind of see these kids with new cars and all that kind of stuff. I got handed the car. You had to park in another zip code so nobody'd know you were the one driving it. You'd walk up. How'd you get here? Oh, never mind. I just got here. But anyway, and so my family really didn't have money for education. I mean, clearly it was supported and encouraged. And another thing for me growing up in my family is that I was never told I could or couldn't do anything, getting involved in sports. I was never told that, girls don't do those kind of things. Really, I was allowed to endeavor in whatever I wanted as long as I gave 110%. That was kind of the mantra of my family, is that if you choose to do something, then you need to try to be successful. Do your best to be successful at that. So with that said, and then coupled with the fact that I was pretty good in sports, and my niece, who's now like 29 years old, was counting. I had high school trophies, and like I said, 6 foot tall, so that's right when Title IX came through, so all the women got involved in sports, so I was on every team imaginable. And my niece was counting trophies in my room at my parents' house, and she just to show that she could count, to a particular number. And so when she's done, she puts her hands on her hips and she goes, "Wow, Aunt Jane, you used to be somebody." Thanks. So anyway, I got a full athletic scholarship to the University of Tampa. And for me, that was the chance of a lifetime for me to get an education, and really opened up the doors from that point forward in just about everything that I have done in my life. So I am forever indebted to University of Tampa, and anything that I can do to help them, or University of South Florida or HCC. I really like talking to students, the next generation, it's going to be the leaders in our community. I really enjoy doing that and giving back as much as I can. So that was really a chance for me to get an education, a 4-year degree. So I went there on a basketball, volleyball scholarship and graduated. At the time, Ronald Reagan was president, the one you guys all see in the history books. He was president, and I had ideas of going into the federal service, like the Secret Service or the FBI, because I thought that was really cool. And he put a freeze on federal hiring, and some of my friends from University of Tampa had gone to the Tampa Police Department, and they said, you ought to try this, you'd probably like it. So literally, I went in having no idea what I was getting into. Now we have individuals have to do ride-alongs. You really have to know what you're getting into in law enforcement. And I always tell people that I was very, very blessed to be able to go into law enforcement, because it definitely was for me. For 31 years, there was never a day I didn't want to go to work. I loved what I did. And a lot of people will say, I don't know how you could be a police officer. For police officers, we don't know how you could do anything else. You're out there helping your community. Every day's different. Every situation is different. You do everything. I've gone from changing light bulbs in the floodlights in the backyard for, an older lady who thought she heard a prowler back there, to arresting armed robbers, arresting murderers, investigating homicides, just anything and everything in between, and you never know what's going to come next. So it's very, very exciting field to get into. So being in, and people say, did you always aspire to be the chief? And I said, no, the only time I really talked about being the chief was when I had about 5 years on, and you think you know everything, as a police officer, and you say, make me chief, I'll fix this place, because it's so easy, until you get in that position and you realize what it entails. So I moved all around. Hey, Susie. I moved all around the police department and really worked just about every position in the organization. And that's one of the pieces of advice I would give to everybody in here, is that when you go out and you get into business, whatever you choose as an occupation, you should do every job within that organization. Know it from top to bottom. It's important that you do that just for the organizational health, but also for your own benefit, because as you move up, especially in law enforcement, as you move up, you get less and less opportunity to move around the department. And you get that experience, you know how your organization operates, and then as supervision opportunities arise, you will already have the experience in that area. And I always tell police officers to move around like every 2 years, go to a different assignment. And I'll talk a little bit about human behavior in a few minutes, but we're all very, very resistant to change. But I tell them you need to move around. So I worked throughout the department, or as my oldest sister described it one night, she said, my sisters worked the streets, then she got into drugs and prostitution, and then she went to Intel, and she was doing sex crimes for a while, and now she's back on the street. So they're like, ooh, nice sister. So that's pretty much the description of my life in the police department. But all of it, every one of the assignments was very exciting. And well, with the exception of the assignment in sex crimes and child abuse, that was the most difficult assignment I had, for sure. I had been a child abuse investigator for years and years and years, but when you go into a position where that's all you see day after day after day after day, and the horrific things that people do to kids and other individuals, the sexual assaults as well as the child abuse, it's difficult. That group has my utmost, everyone has my respect, but that group, my utmost respect because it's so difficult. So I didn't really aspire to be the chief of police, but I'm pretty competitive. I tell everybody I don't have to be number one, I just can't be number two. So that's my way of putting it. But I would always put myself in position to be promoted. A lot of people in the organization, you know, when I was younger, all had their bachelor's degree, the majority. So I went out, got my master's degree, and then I would always study and do well on all the promotional exams. So you know, it was a benefit to me. Now, being a woman was a benefit to me as well, a benefit and a hindrance. Same thing in college. As an athlete, I had professors that would just hammer me all the time. You know, you're an athlete, you think you're special, you get all the, you know, the favors, and they were tougher on me than anybody else. And then I had other professors that did give me breaks because I was in that position. Same thing happens in law enforcement as well. And one statement that I make in all the presentations is that everyone, regardless of who you are, everyone is going to be discriminated against in their life, everyone. And to me, the importance in that situation is how you deal with it. Because if you go through life saying, oh, such and such didn't like me, that's why, you know, like my kids. Oh, I did poorly on that exam because the teacher doesn't like me. Oh, really? It couldn't have anything to do with the fact you didn't study for it. But it's how you deal with it and how you internalize it and how, you know, you make that a learning experience and then ensure that you'll never do anything like that to someone else, or you go through life with a chip on your shoulder. You know, I've had, I'll give you one of the great examples is, I was the assistant chief of operations. So that meant I had all of the uniform officers. So out of 1,000 police officers in our organization, like 800 of them worked for me. And when they got in trouble, it's almost like dealing with my kids. You know, they try to finagle their way out of it until they got backed into a corner and then be like, oh, did you see what such and such did? Well, we're not talking about that now. We're focusing on you. But they had great names for me because I was in charge of all the discipline. I was the hatchet woman. My favorite was the Castor Raider. I always liked that one. Yeah. But the one thing too would be the officers that would say, you know, the chiefs never liked me anyway. That's why I'm getting in trouble. And you know, I would always want to say to them, newsflash, I don't even know who you are. And I certainly don't lay awake at night wondering, you know, how I can get officer such and such in trouble. But owning mistakes that you make and learning from them is also incredibly, incredibly important, very important, and not, you know, trying to justify your way out of it. There is, and it may be just because I'm getting old, but it just seems like there's less and less responsibility for issues, people taking responsibility, and that's very important. I arrested some kids one time for auto theft, and the one kid's like, you know, I don't have to worry about this because my dad's an attorney. I'm like, well, whatever. So the father shows up, and he goes, can I talk to my son? I said, sure. And so I told him, I said, you know, pulled him over. Your son was driving the stolen car. You know, the ignition's punched, so it's not like they didn't know it was stolen. They don't have keys. And he comes out and he says, well, my son said he didn't do it. I'm like, well, that's great. You know, I would have been across the room if I'd said that to my dad. But I said, well, I'm telling you that I caught him in the car. Well, he said he didn't do it. I'm like, okay, you know, he'll be one of our customers in the future. But again, you know, taking responsibility for those for your actions, and then with the discrimination too. And I don't mean to make light of that because I know that there are significant discriminatory actions towards people, but again, that can't bother you for the rest of your life when the person that injured you in the first place has forgotten about it. You really have to deal with those kinds of things. So I move up and I became the chief. I'll go back a little bit and talk a little bit about organizational change. As was stated, we were able to successfully reduce crime in the city by over 70%. And it's been done in New York City, for example, but they did it in a much longer, over 20 years. And I'll tell you the way that we were able to do that, but I'll also tell you that there were was a lot of skepticism, especially from the media. There's no way you can reduce crime as much as you did. So I'm no statistician. You can look at the grades that I got in college in statistics or any other math, or ask my kids. They lost me in math like in 4th grade. They'd come up and go, "Mom, can you help with this?" And I'd look at it and be like, "Oh," and they'd be like, "Just as I suspected." Or you give them the answer to the problem, they're like, "That's not the way the teacher did it." I'm like, "Is that the answer? How do you do math 2 ways?" Apparently there's the old way and there's a new way that I don't know. So here's what I would tell people if you're not a statistician. I say, look at the 2 crimes that are accurately reported. That is auto theft and homicide. You know, you could have come out this morning to get in your car to come to class. If you're like me, you're probably running a few minutes late, and you left your car unlocked. You get in and somebody's rifled through your car, you know, may have taken a couple of dollars, this or that, and then you're like, should I or should I not report that? You may or may not report it, but if you come out in the morning and your car's not in the driveway, you're going to report that. And we've reduced auto theft by over 90% over the last 12 years. And then with homicides, when people find a dead body, they usually call the police. And we went from, in the heyday of the crack cocaine back in the late 80s, we had 79 homicides in 1 year. The lowest during our crime reduction was 19 homicides in 2009. Now, this sounds horrible because every homicide is a human life, is someone's loved one. But we usually have between 24 and 26 homicides in the city. For all the cities our size throughout the United States, the next closest to us averages over 50-some homicides. So we're very proud of what we've done in the crime reduction. We've made a lot of mistakes, but we have clearly made a lot of difference in our community. And we talk about quite often about all of those statistics and the reduction in the numbers and this and that. We analyze everything at the police department. But in the final analysis, the most important number in there is the reduction in victims of crime. You know, all of those people that didn't have their car stolen, that weren't a victim of robbery, that we were able to prevent becoming victims because of, not only because of the way that we focused on crime, but also with the community's help. The police officers, we think we know everything. Everybody needs to be protected from rapists, robbers, and murderers, which is true, but very few people are victims of those kind of crimes. So we went, and when we asked the citizens in the neighborhood, what do you need from us? What do you want us to do? The biggest issue in the beginning of our organizational change was the biggest response was, I don't want my stuff taken. I don't want somebody taking my car, breaking into my house and taking my stuff. And so that's what we focused on. We actually called it Focus on 4, which are 4 Part 1 crimes. And the ones that we focused on were ones that happened in patterns, and they lent themselves to investigation and to enforcement. For example, homicide. Homicide's a very important crime, but it's very random. It's difficult to enforce and prevent those types. There are ways, but as a group. Same thing with aggravated batteries. Those happen in very large numbers, but they really don't lend themselves to enforcement. Auto burglary, residential burglary, robberies, and auto theft. Those are the 4 crimes. And by focusing on those, it had a ripple effect on all other crime. And all crime categories, Part 1 and Part 2, we have had a reduction over the last 13 years, with the exception of 1 year, and it was less than a 1% increase. So every year we're looking at new ways, new things to be able to reduce crime in our city and make it safe. Now, to the organizational change. Organizational change is the most difficult thing you will ever be involved in when you get out into the business world. I can guarantee you that. Because like I said before, human beings are resistant to change. If they say they like change, they're one of 2 things. They're either a liar, or what they mean is, I like change for that guy over there, don't be changing my world. Because, and think about it, you're a creature of habits. I meet my brothers for lunch every Wednesday at the same restaurant. My brothers, I always tell them, man, anybody who wanted to take you two guys out, all they'd have to do is follow your lunch schedule. Same time, same place, Monday through Thursday, every week. So we're all creatures of habit, and that gets back to changing. You don't like, changing your assignment every few years. You're comfortable, you know it, you like what you're doing. Why would you uproot yourself and go into a place that you don't know what's going on, you don't know the organization? So it's very difficult. We did a lot of things. One, we changed our mission, so it was very simple: reduce crime, improve the quality of life through a cooperative partnership with all citizens. Very, very simple. It wasn't the mission statement that was next to the elevator that nobody understood or could recite. Again, we brought in analysts, and we analyzed everything and allowed our officers to police more smartly. There wasn't any random patrol. They went out and they looked at the hot spots, and they looked at who the offenders are, and we really tried to put a surgical focus on those individuals. Anybody in criminology knows 20% of the bad guys commit 80% of the crime. That 20% is what we were trying to focus on, so that we didn't sweep anybody up in a net that didn't deserve our attention. So that was one of the things we did. One of the things we did too was to hold everybody accountable. And that was very important. And that's a statement that's easy to say, it's very difficult to do. And I do a lot of the leadership training. I would talk to all of our supervisors that were promoted, and they'd all be shaking their heads like, yeah, you're right. And I'd be thinking, the majority of you aren't going to be able to go out there and do it, because people want to be everybody's friend. And I would always say that it's easy to be the good guy. There's really no strength in that position. It's in making the tough decisions for the right reasons that leaders are born. And if you think about the people that you have had as supervisors or teachers, whoever in your life that you respected and admired the most, it's the ones that held the bar high and made you strive to live up to their expectations. It wasn't the one that wanted to be your friend or your buddy. So that's the type of leader you need to be. And you don't have to have a supervisor's title there. Everybody can be a leader, everybody. So that was one of the things that we focused on, as well as accountability. And then the partnership with the community was very important. People have no idea what police officers do. And in this day and age, what the media would have you believe is that police officers have roll call, and then they break roll call and they go out on the streets looking for black males to shoot. Police officers are in the job of saving lives. And I can tell you, I respond to every single call where a police officer has shot somebody, or I did when I worked there. And I've seen grown men cry. I've seen grown men throw up. There is nobody, I shouldn't say there's nobody in law enforcement. If they are, they get weeded out awfully quick, that want to take somebody else's life. We get into law enforcement to help people, to save their lives. And that, the deadly force, is a last resort, or should be. Now, when I say that, what I'm working on now in my afterlife is consulting, and most of it is trying to improve law enforcement nationwide. Because here's a reality of law enforcement. If you look at public perception of different professions, if you look at public perception of physicians, everybody holds doctors in high esteem. Now, a doctor can kill a patient, and people will say, that guy probably shouldn't be a doctor, but they still hold doctors in high esteem. If you look at a public perception chart of police officers, it looks like an EKG. It goes up and down, up and down. If a police officer is killed in the line of duty, everybody loves police officers. You have something like Ferguson happen, and all police officers pay for that. Police officers in Tampa were blamed for what occurred out there in Ferguson. So those are the kind of things that we, as a profession, we need to make sure we weed out those individuals that shouldn't be in law enforcement and are a horrible example of what law enforcement is all about. Now, one of the ways that we try to communicate and work more effectively with the citizens is we hold a lot of, one, we have citizens academies. I know Susie's been through one. We hold those twice a year, and they are amazing. It's for one night every week for 9 weeks. Actually, now they've revamped it, and they have one day as an all day on Saturday, and then just a couple of weeknight events. So the best when you get to go to communications, see how dispatch works, you get to see how forensics works, you get to see all the special teams, you know, the helicopter, the dogs, the horses, the bikes, all of those types of things that we have. But the best night for us, for law enforcement, is a use of force night, because we make the citizens the police officers, and then we have them engage in normal police activities. They do traffic stops, they do building searches, those kind of things. And without exception, the citizens who are the police officers shoot everybody, and they shoot them immediately. We had, I don't know if anybody knows Yolanda from the Tampa Park Plaza. She's the manager of the apartment complex. And she went through, and so she goes up to the car, and it's police officers driving. She goes up and she goes, I need to see your license and registration. She's like, I'm not giving it to you. She goes, I told you I need to see your license and registration. I'm not giving it to you. He says, get out of the car. He goes, I'm not getting out of the car. He goes, get out of the car. He goes, I'm not getting out of the car. So she backs up and she shoots him. Yolanda. She goes, I told him twice to get out of the car. I go, Yolanda, we got to tell him at least 3 times. I mean, come on. But you know, it's that kind of, and then afterwards, people get up, at the graduation, get up and talk about, you know, anything they want to talk about. And the vast majority, the first thing they say is, I could never do this job. And when Tanya Lewis went through, I always try to get a very diverse group of individuals that go through the Citizens Academy, because they first walk in the first night and they're like, ooh, what am I doing in here with all these people that aren't exactly like me? And then by the end of it, they're all fast friends, because they find that their similarities far outweigh their differences. But Tanya Lewis, who was a community activist, and I'll admit, I drug her in kicking and screaming. She got up and gave a speech in the end, and she goes, and I'll tell you right now, she said, Chief Castor drugged me in here, and she goes, and I've never been a fan of the police department. She said, but now after going through the Citizens Academy, I pray for each and every one of you before I go to sleep at night. So, you know, just again, it's not any kind of a brainwashing cult. It's just to give that experience to law enforcement. And also, if you don't have time for the Citizens Academy, you can do a ride-along anytime, 24/7. Go out in your neighborhood, any neighborhood you want to go in the city of Tampa, and you can ride around with an officer and see what they do every day, so that you get more of a grasp of exactly what occurs in the police department. Now, one of the things in the organizational change, and you said 115, right? 130. Oh, 130. Okay, good. I'll talk more. Another thing that we did is that we instituted what I call the golden rule in the police department, and that is that everyone is treated with dignity and respect, and there's no exception. It doesn't matter if it's the most influential person in the city or it's a homeless person in handcuffs in your back seat. Every single person is treated with dignity and respect, and that is non-negotiable in the police department. So a few years ago, we started into the procedural policing and implicit and explicit bias and all of those types of training for law enforcement, a lot of research, like the police executive sessions. And lo and behold, all the research showed that individuals in their encounters with the police didn't care what they were charged with if they were arrested. They didn't really care if they got a ticket or a warning. What they cared about ultimately was how the police officer treated them. If they allowed them to give their side of the story, if they treated them with respect. That's what was most important to every encounter with a police officer. So again, that's what the officers are expected to do at the Tampa Police Department. Also, one of the things that I always talk to people about in the Citizens Academy, what police officers have to deal with as well as perception. And that's very important, because someone's perception is their reality. And there's not a police officer in the world that hasn't pulled a vehicle over, walked up, and the driver said, you pulled me over because fill in the blank, because I'm white, because I'm black, because I'm a woman, because I'm Latino, because I'm, fill in the blank. And it's like, well, actually I pulled you over because you ran the red light. And the truth is, when you pull the car over, you really can't, in most instances, tell who's driving until you get up to the door anyway. But if that person's perception is that you did something based on their race, their ethnicity, sex, then that's their reality. And that's something that, as police officers, we have to deal with that. One of the ways that I tried to deal with it in the police department was to have liaisons to different groups in the community, the African American community, the Hispanic community, gay and lesbian community. Because if someone perceives that they were treated a certain way, hearing from someone that they can relate to better often helps. For example, I was a liaison to the gay and lesbian community for years, and I would have people call and say, I got, my neighbor and I got in a disagreement, the police were called, and the police sided with my neighbor, and I think they did that because I'm gay. And I would say, no, the reason they did that is because here's what the statute says, and this is the reason the officer made that decision. They're like, oh, okay. So it's important, again, that we deal with individuals' perceptions and try to make them understand or facilitate their understanding of why police took their actions, the actions that we did. Now I'll tell a story about firefighters. I love firefighters. If anybody has relatives who are firefighters, I love firefighters. I say firefighters, they can show up late, the whole house burns down, and everybody's like, well, at least y'all tried. And then they run off to bake an apple pie. And the police department, think about what we do. We show up in a lot of instances to mediate or to decide who's right and who's wrong in a situation. So oftentimes we irritate half the people that we work with or that we deal with. And we even have, I'll tell you this is a great classic story here. I don't know if anybody knows the Montega family that owns La Gazzetta down the street. So he tells me one night that the fire alarm goes off in his business. Now he owns a paper, so fire alarm's pretty serious. So he goes rushing down there, down 7th Avenue, and of course the police have the street blocked off. There's fire hoses everywhere. And he goes rushing down there, and he goes around the police car, and he screeches up, and he goes, yeah, and the cop ran up, and he just started screaming at me, and he's going on, disparaging the police. So then he goes over and finds that the fire alarm is not for his business, it's the business next to his. So as the fire department is putting out the fire, they accidentally aim the hose at his paper, and they put a hole through one of the windows and flood one of the offices. So he's talking about what jerks TPD, what the officers, how horrible they were because they stopped him from going around the barricade and yelled at him when he did, but how great the officers or the firefighters were because they cleaned up all the water in the building. And I wanted to go, you mean all the water they poured in there by accident? But anyway, that kind of goes to show the difference between law enforcement and the firefighters. And I always joke, well, we always do, we're always back and forth with those guys. But it's a difficult, law enforcement is a difficult job. We have to do everything. We are the mental health counselors, and the mental health facilities are the jails these days, which is very difficult. Dealing with homeless, we have 2 homeless liaisons. A lot of the individuals that are homeless just need a little bit of assistance. They just need, an ID card, a birth certificate, something like that, that really seems inconsequential to all of us, the ability to get it. They just don't have the wherewithal to do that. And so we help them do that and get themselves back up on their feet. Now, the last couple of minutes, what I'll talk about before I open it up to questions, and any of you guys that came in late, you got to ask questions or else I keep talking. So that's the downside of it. We'll talk a little bit, since it is Women's Celebration, about women in leadership roles. As I said before, law enforcement happens to be a male-dominated profession. I really never had any real issues being in the position. Most police officers want somebody who's a good a good officer, and it really doesn't matter. It's actually very interesting now. When I first came on the police department back in the mid-'80s, gay women were widely accepted. I remember a sergeant one time saying, where do I get some of those? Like you go to the grocery store and pull them off the shelf, you know? I'll take a gallon of milk and 6 lesbian officers. And then, but the male officers really had to, you know, stay in the closet. And now the young kids now, it doesn't matter. And that's one of the things that I think is wonderful, is the diversity. Said that millennials, I had a presentation on millennials, and they said that millennials only recognize diversity when it's absent. I think that's so cool. I know, I think that is just absolutely wonderful. So, I get chosen as the first female chief of police, Tampa Police Department. And what I said when I was sworn in is at the end of my tenure, I didn't want to be remembered as the first female chief. I wanted to be remembered as a good chief. Now, with that said, it was never lost on me the significance of being the first woman chief of police. The reality is a man in my position as a chief can fail and they'll say, oh, whoever couldn't do the job. They fail as an individual. If I had failed, the response would have been, I told you a woman couldn't do it. So it was very, very important to me that I did a good job and that I worked very hard at what I did and that I was a good role model. You were never going to see my name on the news for doing anything inappropriate. That was very, very important because everybody's watching you, especially as a chief of police. And trust me, I mean, Home Depot, Publix, everywhere. But I had a woman come up to me at a spring breakfast and she said, my daughter saw you, my 9-year-old daughter saw you on the news this morning. And she said, Mom, is that the chief of police? And she said, yes, it is. And she goes, wow, I guess I can be anything I want to be. So that's the significance of being in that position. Another thing that was very important for me is one, that the police department mirrored the community that we serve in diversity. And that's not easy to do. It really isn't as easy as, you know, people would have it be said. What is a little bit easier for me as the chief of police is to have a staff that is very diverse, to have different opinions at that table. Now, one of the things that always still to this day sticks in my mind is when the Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor was being sworn in, and somebody on the committee said, you know, we're afraid that your Hispanic heritage is going to influence the decisions you make. And my response was, well, no shit. I mean, is that not the point of diversity? Everybody in this room, all of us, are a sum total of our life experiences. And so you have to bring those different experiences, those different viewpoints into the staff table or the boardroom where the decisions are being made, especially if those decisions affect everybody in the city of Tampa. It's very, very important to have those differences of opinions and that people feel comfortable expressing that. And I'm going to tell you, it's not always, you know, sunshine and puppies in those events because people express their opinions and ultimately it was up to me to make the decision. So my rule was in the staff room, everybody gives their opinion, gives their viewpoint, gives their substantiation for their viewpoint, and then I make the decision, and when we walk out the door, everybody's on board with that decision, period. It's not, well, you know, I wanted to do this, but this person wanted to do this. So it was always important, too, that as a staff, there wasn't any infighting or any of that seen. Everybody felt comfortable that their position was expressed and that their opinion was valued. Now, I'll stop, or I'll open it up to questions with one funny story about people would say, you know, were you ever discriminated against as a woman in law enforcement? And I was. Well, fights, people say, man, how can you be a woman in law enforcement? I tell you, women and our ability to communicate, a little better than guys, but our ability to communicate you know, you can talk your way. People will say, what's the most important tool that you have, you know, on your gun belt? I'd always ask the kids, and they'd always say either your gun or your taser. I'd be like, no, it's your ability to communicate, to talk your way into or out of a situation. And the majority of the knockdown, drag-out fights that I got into, most fights police officers get into are, I don't want to go to jail fights. It's not, I want to hurt you fights. And most of them were caused by male police officers. You know, everything was fine until the testosterone showed up, and then all of a sudden you're like this. Because the guys, they just really wanted to save face in front of their friends. You know, and they'd be like, ooh, yeah, baby, put those handcuffs on me. And I'd be like, yeah, whatever. You know, put them on, take them off. But again, you know, your ability to communicate and to talk to people. So again, it's all in how you handle the discrimination. So I would tell people that, you know, I would express my viewpoint sometimes, and everybody would be like, yeah, whatever. And then it'd go around the room, and a male would basically say the same thing, and they're like, oh my God, that's genius. I'm thinking, well, I just said that. But I watched a commercial one day that brought it all home. It was this corporate boardroom, and they had, I call the wall people, you know, one of the people sitting along off of the board table. And he said something, and everybody's like, yeah, whatever. And then it gets around to the head of the corporation, and he says the same thing. And they're like, oh my God, that's genius. And the guy goes, I just said that. And they're like, yeah, but you didn't do this. So I realized all those years when I was expressing my opinion, I just wasn't doing it right. So that's pretty much it for, I've gone 5 minutes over. So we have 10 minutes. You guys can ask any question you want to ask. Yes, sir.
I'm a U.S. veteran, and I respect anyone who volunteers their life to public service. Having said that, with all due respect, how would you comment on the issue not being public perception for the media's coverage of the police force, but rather the blatant and systemic racism of our justice system? For example, minimum mandatory sentences, the differences between crack and the cocaine powder form, or the fact that our prisons are disproportionately represented by blacks and minorities?
Yes. Okay, a couple of things. One, the Brennan Center for Justice which I'm on a part of that, not on a board, but a part of that, and looking at the minimum mandatory. Minimum mandatory, everybody thought that was a great idea, and you can actually, it's very interesting if you want to learn a lot about it and look at that, and it came out of California. It doesn't work. It shows that it hasn't worked in those. The deal with the crack cocaine versus powder cocaine, and I can tell you this, I lived this. Back in the 80s with the advent of crack cocaine, that destroyed African American neighborhoods, destroyed them. And I can't say that a lot of communities have fully recovered from the crack cocaine epidemic. Hold on, I'm trying to answer your question. So there were laws put in place to try to deal with that, you know, with the overarching destruction. The problem is, as we see now, is that individuals were being unfairly treated with the difference, and that's been changed. Now, here's what because I worked narcotics, I was one of the ones out there making the arrests on the street corner for crack cocaine. And I'm not the smartest person in the world, but it occurred to me in the very beginning that we're allowing these shipments, large quantities of cocaine, to come in to the United States, and then it's all cooked up, cut up into little rocks, and given to young African American males to sell out on the street corner, and now we're going to go and enforce it at that level. That's just sort of a losing proposition. So I agree, and that is being looked at now. And the problem isn't so much, I don't think, going and looking at the individuals that are in the prisons now. We need to back way, way, way up to the educational system and stop taking funding out of education and give individuals a fair chance and an opportunity to work, as opposed to not having any way to sustain themselves. And that ends up in that prison pipeline. So that's what I think that the focus should be, more on the educational system for everyone, and more of an education in the trades. I'm not sure why we ignore that as a country, that there's not trade education anymore. There's a part two, I can tell. Go ahead.
Oh, no,
that's it? Okay, next. Somebody else held their hand up. No? All right, you guys ask a question.
Crack and powder form cocaine weed.
Do what?
The major difference in powder cocaine and crack cocaine.
You mean as far as sentencing or literally?
What is the difference?
Well, I don't know. I haven't done either one of them. But the crack cocaine is supposed to be that it's almost like heroin in that it's the same substance, but the delivery is much quicker and much more intense. And people who literally have the first time, I've talked to a lot of informants, a lot of people we've arrested, the first time they hit that, they're done. That's another thing. I think two things we're going to learn so much about in the next decade. Human perception. We've just about done away with eyewitness identification because it's so flawed. And the second one is going to be addiction. I believe there's so much more physiology in that we don't. There are people out on the streets that I've dealt with for years and years, homeless individuals that just drink from sunup to sundown. And some of them stop, doesn't faze them, and others will go through DTs and everything else. So I think addiction is something that we're going to learn a lot about, which we really need to. Yes, ma'am.
Question, I read something in there about the tasers for the gun posters. They're going to use some kind of device that when the officers pull out the gun, that it's going to trigger camera. Some
yeah, that's yeah. Well, here's it's not an idea of want or not want. When I was a chief, her question was about tasers and having video cameras on them. They have them now, and they have had for a long time. The issue one is tasers are $800 a piece, which is more than an actual firearm, and then every cartridge is 20-some bucks a piece every time it's shot, and they make you use 2 every time you qualify with it. So it's more the expense associated with that. Now, taser, when we went to the body-worn cameras, I let the officers do it all. Write the policy, look into the different companies, and make a proposal for which company to choose. They chose Taser, who couples with evidence.com, and so it's kind of a turnkey. What I mean by that is the officers, the video camera, they video things, they go and they download that into a system, and it's all managed by this evidence.com, because you don't think about that. Everybody goes, give cops a camera. That sounds great. We can give all cops a camera. It's in the management of that. One, that video cannot be altered in any way, shape, or form. It has to be handled appropriately for evidentiary value. You can't all of a sudden get to court and it's missing. You have to look at all of that video. Think about this. 10 officers show up at a homicide scene and they all have cameras and they leave those things running the entire time. The state attorney has got to watch every single second of every single one of those videos before any of that is released to the defense. Then you have an argument in your home and cops come in there with a camera on, and then your neighbor puts in a request to get that footage so they can see what's going on in your home. All of these issues, ancillary issues that people don't think about, coupled with the cost is obscene for the evidence storage for those cameras. So it's not that police officers don't want the cameras. The vast majority would love to wear a camera, because then they can show what, they know it's being filmed, and if they act stupid when they know it's being filmed, then, that it's just so expensive. I'm trying to think, we have 60 cameras, and I'm trying to think of, I want to say it was around $8 million for, so much storage and all the cameras and everything else. It's just unbelievably expensive. But Taser does have, on their tasers, as soon as it's activated, there's a camera on it.
And that's the one that goes in the holster?
Yeah, it's opposite side.
Are able to see, even though, because they in the routine of stopping a crime or whatever, or dealing with a crime, and how could they be able to use their camera and do the crime at the same time? They can slip and fall or something like that. So shouldn't other, wow.
Yeah, it's just not that simple, and there's always going to be situations where the camera wasn't on, or the other thing I tell everybody is that it's not going to be like the NFL playback, where you're going to see 6 different angles and all this. One, fights are not pretty. when officers get involved in those. And you're right, you know, they could be knocked off. They can wear them on their chest here. They can wear them on glasses. They have different configurations where they can wear those. I like the ones that are on their glasses are attached over the ear, because everywhere they look, that camera's on. But if they get in a fight, you never know, you know, what you're going to get on that video footage.
I guess I'm talking about, right, I'm talking about the device that's in the holster.
Yeah, tasers. Right. But then you're only going to use it whenever they pull a taser. And the tasers are cross holster if you're right-handed.
Not just that person.
Oh, you mean somebody else to be able to see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be practical in real time, because they pull the taser and they use it. You know, you're not going to have time to react. So that wouldn't be practical to be able to watch it in real time.
Website is something that they
yeah.
looking into. Maybe it's a new.
Now our helicopters, we can watch those in real time. Cameras on the helicopters, and that saves a lot of lives as well. You know, you avoid pursuits and everything else. So those are real good. Cameras definitely are the future, and I look at it like all other new technology, like the new televisions where they're, you know, $5,000 at Christmas, and then by July they're on sale for like $99.99. So hopefully that's the way it's going to go with these camera systems, because storing that video is not that difficult in the cloud. So hopefully that'll go down so we can buy more. All right, anybody else have any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Who are your female role models, and what role did they take in inspiring you to become the success that you are?
Ooh, I'd have to say probably my family, my mom, my sisters. Yeah, I would have to say my family, some teachers, you know, some of the coaches that I had in high school. I had one coach who was a basketball coach, and she always said, I always tell my kids this too, she always said, practice to be the best, play to be the best, know that you are the best, but never tell anybody, let them figure it out on their own. And that's actually advice I give to all the women who are promoted. That's every time I would get promoted, people would say, oh, she got promoted because of her mother. Everybody thought my mother was Betty Castor. So I'd call my mom, and my mom's name's Carolyn. I'd be like, oh, guess what? You got me promoted again. Which, you know, I just thought that was funny. You know, she got promoted because her mother. It's like, and at the time I'd never met Betty Castor. I have since. But I would always I would bring the female officers that were promoted, and I would bring them in, and I would say, you're gonna face backlash. You're gonna face resistance. Don't try to argue with people. Don't lower yourselves to their level. Just go about proving them wrong every day, and eventually they'll come about. The first night I made sergeant, I went to another district on midnights where I didn't really know a lot of people, and oh my gosh, my squad was all either really seasoned people or brand spanking new, and there was some serious resistance from a few of those individuals who I ended up being best friends with. So, you know, again, just go about proving people wrong every day. So, but you do have to have mentors in your life. For me, in an all-male profession, the majority of the mentors were males, and they were very helpful. Yes.
Do you hold find yourself like not in a mean way, but like, do you hold your female officers to a higher standard than your male? I do, and it may not be fair. And it's also a little difficult for me to talk women into getting into law enforcement, because you become very hard. I'll give you an example. I'm doing after action report for the Pulse nightclub shooting. So I'm talking to somebody, and she's like, yeah, you know, I had this facial thing, ablation, whatever, done today, and goes on and on. How was your day? And I go, well, we interviewed the dispatchers, and they were talking about how they got the calls, people begging them to help, and then they hear shots, and they hear like the people die on the phone, and she goes, well, that makes me feel rather shallow. So, you know, just the things you see and do. I tell people the greatest thing about law enforcement is you get to see and do things nobody else gets to see and do. The downside is you have to see and do things that nobody should ever have to see or do. So it hardens you as a woman. But yeah, I always held women to a much higher standard. Yes, ma'am.
What would be your best and worst days while you were chief?
Oh, my best to be hard to define. Worst, there's a few of those. Probably would be when I first got that call that 2 officers, I barely made chief, and we had 2 officers killed on a traffic stop. That was tough. There's a lot of them. When I was young, I was at FTO and on Interbay. They hadn't had any lights there. It was about 100 years ago, and these kids were walking along the roadway, and this 17-year-old, this is how old it was, leaned down to change the cassette tape and ran off the road and hit all 3 of them, killed 2 of them. And that I had to go home with the parents because they were so distraught. They were younger than I was. And the little kid's bike sitting outside and all his clothes are folded inside, and I had to go get a picture of him so I could identify him. And I had to go to the hospital and identify the other one. So, I mean, those kind of things are things that, like I said, you don't ever want to have to do, fishing kids out of pools and things like that. But good days are all the other ones for the most part. They really are. As it's, being able to help people, being able to reduce a crime, even when you can't go up to somebody and say, you may have been a murder victim, you can't quantify it with individuals, but your city's safer, so that makes you feel real good. I'm very proud of the crime reduction. Yes, ma'am.
Do you see yourself counseling more to the female officers or the male officers?
Actually, a little bit of both. We started, one of the things, I'll end it here because I know everybody has to go. One of the things I always felt as a failure was that there was nothing that we could do for the officers that had seen and done all these traumatic things. And so we started a retreat with Sister Ann Doherty, one of the Franciscan nuns, is one of our pastors. And she started a retreat the officers go to, and it's phenomenal. It's after the military post-traumatic stress, and they have this thing, eye movement, EMDR. I tell you, I would have said it was complete BS if I hadn't gone through it. It is the most phenomenal thing ever. Anyway, it's a lot of counseling, everything else. And I would ask everybody to come see me, the officers, afterwards, because it was all anonymous. I'd have to drag them all, what's wrong with me? So they would come back, and to the person, they would all, mostly the men, would cry and say, I had no idea how all of this has affected me through the years. And one of the officers said, my wife's going to call you and thank you for giving her husband back. So it's, you officers, we just keep burying everything we see and do, and it's not healthy. So at least that's sort of a way to deal with some of it. So, all right, that was kind of a drag. All right, let me tell, okay, here I'll tell you right before we go, I always have to tell my kids stories. They're getting ready to turn 18, and they're just a hoot. They're 2 months apart. So I'm taking my son to basketball camp one day, and there had been this horrific accident where these 2 cars were racing. They'd gone up over an incline. One lost control, hit a concrete wall, and burned up. The guy was burned up in the car. It was just horrific. So I tell my son, I go, look, I got to stop by here, make sure everything's fine, and then I'll take you to basketball camp. And he goes, oh, good. He goes, I want to see. And I said, look, buddy, I said, this isn't anything for a little kid to see. I said, you just wait in the car. So I get up there, I'm talking to all the officers, and my phone buzzes, and there's a text, and it's from my son. He goes, I don't know why I can't come up there. I'm already scarred for life. little commentary on my parenting skills. So hopefully the rest of you haven't ruined your children's lives. So thank you all very much for your attention.